Most people in the gym are not building muscle. They're maintaining at best. Today, I'm going to break down the actual science of muscle growth and what's driving it at the cellular level. Most program designs fail and people don't properly periodize or structure their programming to support hypertrophy and rest and recovery. And then how to structure a hypertrophy block that actually forces your body to add real functional muscle tissue. And let's get into it. What is hypertrophy? There's 3 elements to hypertrophy, and you need to actually understand what's going on inside the muscle and where it grows. And there are 3 primary mechanisms driving hypertrophy, and that's mechanical tension, metabolic stress, and muscle damage. Of these, mechanical tension is the king, and this is when muscle fiber is placed under load, especially in a lengthened position, and mechanoreceptors in the cell membrane detect the tension and trigger a downstream signaling, and protein synthesis will ramp up and the whole repair and rebuild process kicks off. And then there's metabolic stress, the pump, the burn you feel. It contributes through cell swelling and the accumulation of metabolites like lactate and hydrogen ions. And it plays a supporting role, particularly in higher rep training and in those more fatiguing ranges. And the third is muscle damage, the micro trauma that you create when you are lifting heavy. And it also contributes, but it's not a requirement for growth. And chasing soreness as a proxy for a good workout is one of the most persistent and damaging myths in the fitness industry. So soreness just means your tissue wasn't adapted to the stimulus. It says nothing about where you grew or about whether you grew. So you want to maximize mechanical tension on the target muscle across a range of repetition schemes and stop chasing soreness. And here's where most everybody goes wrong. They think about exercise selection and they obsess over whether to use cables or dumbbells, and they debate incline bench versus flat bench, and none of that really matters as much as the 3 variables that actually drive hypertrophic adaptation, and that's volume, frequency, and intensity. So volume is measured in hard sets per muscle group per week and is your primary driver of hypertrophy stimulus. More sets up to a point equal more growth signal. And then frequency, how often you train a muscle per week, determines how you distribute that volume. And higher frequency generally means your recovery between sessions is more. Higher frequency generally means better recovery between sessions and more total practice with movements. And then there's intensity, and this in a true sense of proximity to failure, and is measured in reps in reserve, RIR. So if you ever see a program that says RIR, that's what it stands for. And it determines whether the volume you're doing is actually stimulating anything. And sets done in more than 5 reps in reserve from failure are mostly just junk volume. They don't drive meaningful mechanical tension on a high enough proportion of motor units. And most recreational lifters are doing too little volume and not close enough to failure, and training muscle so infrequently that adaptation barely has time to occur before the stimulus disappears. And that is a recipe for a plateau. So the bottom line is volume, proximity to failure, and frequency are the levers, and everything else is secondary. And then there's something called the SRA curve. And your body doesn't grow during training, it grows in recovery. And so understanding this changes everything about how you design a program. When you train a muscle hard, you create a stimulus, and then that stimulus causes fatigue, soreness, reduced performance, inflammation over the next 48 to 72 hours. And the body recovers past baseline and arrives at a slightly higher level of adaptation. And this is the SRA curve, or the stimulus recovery adaptation curve. And if your next training session is hitting that muscle at the top of that curve, you layer more adaptation on top, And if you train too soon, before full recovery, or too late, and after adaptation has decayed towards baseline, you're not maximizing that curve. So this is why training frequency matters. And for most muscle groups, hitting them 2 times a week allow you to capitalize on the SRA curve effectively, and advanced trainers or advanced trainee may benefit from 3 times a week. And the nuance is that it's not static. So as training volume increases across the mesocycle, which is the weeks of your program, the fatigue component grows faster than the adaptation component. And eventually you need a deload. And this is the entire logic behind periodized training, and we'll hit that detail in another video. So how to structure a hypertrophy block. So let's get practical. Typically, you want this to be 4 to 8 weeks, and it should be built around the concept of progressive volume overload. And you start at minimum effective volume, MEV, for each muscle group, and then progressively increase towards your maximum adaptive volume, MAV, across the mesocycle. And so MEV is the minimum number of weekly sets that produces measurable hypertrophy for you, so it's specific to you. For most people though, this is somewhere between 6 to 10 sets per muscle group per week, depending on your training history in the muscle. For more advanced, that might fall more in those 10 to 50 per muscle group per week ranges. And then MAV is the volume sweet spot where you're getting the most growth per set. This is typically 12 to 20 sets per muscle group per week in most trained individuals, but it varies widely, and it could also depend on the muscle group. And so here's how that looks in practice. You would have week 1 at 10 sets, and then week 2 at 12 sets, week 3 at 15 sets, week 4 at 18, followed by deload week, where volume drops sharply to allow full SRA to complete the recovery curve. And then that deload is not optional. It is where a significant portion of your actual gains are consolidated. And for hypertrophy with rep ranges, anywhere from 5 to 30 repetitions can build muscle, as long as you're within that proximity to failure, usually with 0 to 4 reps in reserve. And lower rep ranges like 5 to 12 emphasize mechanical tension, and higher rep ranges like 15 to 30 emphasize metabolic stress and cell swelling. And for a complete hypertrophy stimulus, you want both across your program. And so what are some actionable takeaways? I have 4 for you. 1, audit your weekly sets, count your hard sets per muscle group per week. If any major muscle group is under 8 sets, you're almost certainly below your minimum effective volume. And so start there. And then 2, train closer to failure. Most sets should end with 0 to 3 reps in reserve. If your finishing sets feel like you have more than 6 repetitions left in your tank, those sets are contributing minimally to your hypertrophy stimulus. So push yourself to get a little bit uncomfortable. And then 3, increase your training frequency. If you're training each muscle group once per week, shift at least to twice a week, and spread the volume across sessions for better recovery and more frequent adaptation signals. That doesn't mean you have to add, if you're doing 3 workouts a week, that doesn't mean you have to add 3 more. It could be that you maybe add 1 more, and then you have glutes on, say you have Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, you could have glutes on Monday and Thursday, and then you could also have quads on Tuesday and Friday, and so that you still hit it twice a week, but you're just spreading it across your workout plan a little bit differently. And then those sessions might just be a combination of upper and lower, and you're just targeting the muscle groups that you want. But that would be if you're limited to how many times per week based off your work schedule or other things, or just your preference, then you could do it that way. Or if you have the availability, you can go up to 6 workouts per week and then have 3 workouts that alternate, or have it be a little bit different and hit your sets in a different way. There's tons of ways you can make it shake, but those are just some ideas if you're limited on time. And then 4, plan your deloads and actually take them. Don't wait until you're wrecked to deload. That's the point of a deload. You want to schedule them proactively every 4 to 6 weeks, depending on how hard you're training. And deloads are not a weakness. They're, again, where the gains are cemented. So that is hypertrophy programming in a nutshell. Mechanisms, levers, and a framework that you can use But if you're serious about building muscle, this is the foundation and everything else sits on this. So get it right before you worry about anything else, and definitely make sure you're eating in a slight calorie surplus or at maintenance. Sometimes you can gain a little bit. So definitely check all the boxes. But as far as training goes, it's a great one. If you like working out, it's an easy one to adjust. The food sometimes is a little bit different story, but thank you. And I hope that was helpful.